The first thing the Concordant fleet saw upon exiting hyperspace wasn't a typical star system. It was a star, but it didn't shine. At the center of the cosmic void, a black sun pulsed silently, as if it were breathing. Around it, millions of ships floated motionless, forming a perfect ring, like dead sentinels guarding an ancient secret. Commander Vec Nor, his amber eyes fixed on the Aegis's holographic screen, felt something he had never experienced in his decades of interstellar campaigns. A chill. And then, before he could issue a command, a signal pierced through the fleet's communications. It wasn't a distress call, nor a threat. It was a single word, in a language forgotten for millennia, yet instantly understood by all. Remember, the silence on the Aegis's bridge was as dense as the void surrounding them. Captain Ral, usually unshakable, let out a whisper that echoed through the room. "This is impossible," Counselor Lyra, her translucent skin and galaxy-reflecting eyes glowing faintly, typed frantically at her console, trying to trace the signal's origin. But there was no source. The signal didn't come from a ship or a planet. It came from every direction, as if space itself were whispering. Master Track, a Zener with a pragmatic mind, broke the silence. "It's a trap," but Vec knew it wasn't. Traps had clear purposes. This was something logic couldn't explain. While the fleet held its defensive formation, the Aegis began a sweep. What they found only deepened the mystery. The drifting ships were intact, showing no signs of battle, but there were no crews. They were empty hulls, preserved in the vacuum like time capsules. Vec ordered the sensors to focus on the nearest planet, a blue-green world orbiting the black sun. At first glance, it looked like paradise, with clear oceans and vast forests. But as they drew closer, the sensors revealed what the eyes couldn't see. The planet was a graveyard. Millions of meticulously arranged graves covered its surface. Each one bore the same cryptic inscription. "Here lies what we were." The crew was torn between fear and curiosity. Master Track pushed for an immediate withdrawal, but Vec knew they couldn't just ignore what they had found. Counselor Lyra suggested an expedition to the planet, convinced there was more than just graves. "There's an energy anomaly at the center of the largest cemetery," she said. "And something alive." Those words made the air on the bridge feel heavier. After a brief debate, Vec decided to lead the mission himself. But when they descended to the surface, what they found defied all expectations. Sitting among the graves, polishing the hull of an ancient human ship, was a man. A human alive on a planet where no life should exist. His name was Elliot, and his presence was as much an enigma as the stellar graveyard itself. He wore simple clothes worn by time, and his gray eyes seemed to carry the weight of ages. When Vec approached, Elliot looked at him with a calm expression, almost familiar. "You've come too soon," he said, as if he had been waiting for them. There was no fear, no surprise in his voice, only unshakable certainty. And before Vec could ask anything, Elliot added, "You still think you're exploring the universe, don't you? But it's the universe that's exploring you." Elliot didn't seem the least bit bothered by the armed crew surrounding him. He kept polishing the hull of the old human ship, as if time itself were irrelevant. Commander Vec, standing rigid and calculating, attempted to initiate standard contact protocol. "Identify yourself and explain your presence on this planet," he ordered firmly. Elliot slowly lifted his eyes, his lips curling into an enigmatic smile. "You still think you have control over what's happening?" His voice was calm, but each word seemed to hang heavy in the air, as if carrying a hidden meaning. The silence that followed was unsettling. Vec was used to facing enemies, but Elliot wasn't an enemy. He was a mystery. Counselor Lyra stepped forward, trying to sense something beneath the surface. Her ability to detect psychic patterns had been crucial on many missions, but as she tried to connect with Elliot, she immediately recoiled, as if she'd touched fire. "He's not just human," she murmured, her eyes wide. "There are echoes inside him, like thousands of voices whispering at once." Master Track, growing impatient, suggested Elliot be detained immediately, but Vec hesitated. There was something in the man's calm demeanor that defied all military logic. "Are you alone here?" Vec asked. Elliot chuckled softly, a sound that seemed to echo beyond the physical. "Alone? No one is ever truly alone here." Determined to uncover the truth, Vec ordered a full scan of the planet while keeping Elliot under close watch. But what they found was even more disturbing. The graves were empty, every single one. There were no bodies, no signs of decomposition. Only residual energy readings that the sensors couldn't identify. Captain Ral, a specialist in tactics and combat, suggested it was the result of some advanced disintegration or transportation technology. But Elliot, overhearing the discussion, merely shook his head. "You're still thinking in terms of technology and weapons. But what happened here can't be undone by science or force." Tension among the crew mounted with every passing minute. Communications with the Aegis began to experience interference, and strange visual distortions appeared on the helmet visors. Master Track insisted it was a trap, some unknown sensory manipulation technology. But Lyra, sensitive to anomalies, disagreed. "This isn't external. It's coming from within us." Vec, torn between his military instincts and the strange feeling that something larger was at play, ordered Elliot to be taken aboard the Aegis for interrogation. But before they could touch him, Elliot spoke calmly. "Take me if you want. But the real prison isn't here." As soon as Elliot was brought aboard the Aegis, the ship's systems began to malfunction. It wasn't a full collapse, but small anomalies that defied technical logic. Doors opening and closing on their own, lights flickering in almost rhythmic patterns, and, most unsettling of all, whispers filtering through the crew's communication channels. At first, they thought it was external interference. But when the voices began calling the crew members by name, names only they themselves knew, fear gripped the ship. Vec confronted Elliot in his cell. "What did you do?" Elliot simply smiled. "Me? I did nothing. You were already carrying this with you. I just showed the way." The crew began to break. Captain Ral, always cold and calculating, was the first to succumb. Found in a dark corridor, he was murmuring his deceased wife's name, convinced she was somewhere on the ship. Other crew members began experiencing memory lapses, as if parts of their lives were being erased or rewritten. Lyra, struggling to maintain her sanity, realized what was happening. The planet, or whatever's in Nemos, "It's rewriting us," she said, her voice trembling. But the question no one could answer was why. Commander Vec, realizing he was losing control of the situation, made a drastic decision. "Whatever's causing this needs to be eliminated," he declared. But Elliot, still calm, offered one final warning. "What you're facing can't be destroyed, because it's not outside of you. It's inside. You came here looking to explore the universe, but what you found was a reflection of what you are. And not everyone is ready to see that." The words echoed in Vec's mind as he prepared for the next move, unaware that every choice he made would only deepen the abyss into which they were falling. Aboard the Aegis, reality began to unravel in subtle yet undeniable ways. Commander Vec noticed it first in the small details. The hours displayed on the ship's chronometer didn't match the crew's sense of passing time. The sound of footsteps in the corridors seemed out of sync with the movements that made them. And then came the voices. At first, they were indecipherable whispers, but soon they evolved into full conversations. Familiar voices, yet impossible ones. Crew members reported hearing deceased loved ones, distant friends, or even versions of themselves. "They're not real," Vec repeated to himself, but a part of him was starting to doubt. Counselor Lyra grew increasingly sensitive to the distortions. During one of her psychic analysis sessions, she tapped into a stream of consciousness that connected her directly with something larger. "It's not just our crew," she said, pale and breathless. "These are the memories of every civilization that's passed through here. They're alive, trapped in this cycle." Master Track, still trying to maintain a rational stance, dismissed her words as stress-induced delusions. But when he himself began to see figures that weren't there, shadows at the edges of his vision that vanished when he turned his head, he realized something was fundamentally wrong. Desperate for answers, Vec decided to confront Elliot again. The cell where the human was held seemed different. The metallic walls reflected not just Vec's image, but distorted versions of himself, with aged faces or fearful expressions he didn't recognize. "What have you done to my crew?" Vec demanded. Elliot looked at him, serene. "I've done nothing. This place simply reveals what you already are." Vec tried to keep his composure, but Elliot's words resonated on a level he couldn't ignore. "Why us? Why now?" Vec asked. Elliot tilted his head, as if explaining something obvious. "Because you were ready to see." As Vec struggled to maintain his authority, the entire ship began acting as if it had a will of its own. Doors locked and unlocked without command, navigation routes shifted spontaneously, and the Aegis's gravitational field fluctuated, defying known physics. Captain Ral, attempting to access the manual systems, discovered something even more disturbing. Communication logs from the fleet that didn't exist. Recordings of conversations between crew members that had never happened, discussions about events that had never occurred. It was as if the ship itself was writing its own parallel history. Tension reached a breaking point when a group of crew members disappeared without a trace. There were no alarms, no signs of struggle. They simply vanished. But the most unsettling part was what they found in their quarters. Logbooks written with future dates, describing events that hadn't happened yet. Vec, increasingly under pressure, began questioning his own sanity. "Are we trapped in a time loop?" he asked Lyra. But her response was even more disturbing. "It's not time that's trapped. This is." Determined to break the cycle, Vec and Track planned to use the Aegis's weaponry to bombard the planet Nemos, believing the source of the anomalies lay on the surface. But before they could execute the plan, Counselor Lyra intervened. "You still think you can destroy this with weapons? Don't you understand that what's happening isn't physical?" Elliot, overhearing the discussion from his cell, added with a smile, "You can try, but what will happen is exactly what's meant to happen." His words weren't a threat, but a certainty that made even the pragmatic Track hesitate. Despite the warnings, Vec gave the order. The Aegis's cannons fired upon the planet, and for a brief moment, it seemed they had won. Explosions ravaged Nemos's surface, cracking the crust and releasing energy in brilliant waves. But then the impossible happened. The planet began to heal, the fractures closing like wounds mending. And not just that, the Aegis shook violently, not from any physical counterattack, but as if the very fabric of space around the ship was rejecting its presence. The stars on the display began to disappear, one by one, until only the void remained. Elliot, now standing in his cell, murmured, "Welcome to the other side." After the failed attack on Nemos, the Aegis drifted in space, but it was no longer the space they knew. The stars had vanished, replaced by an absolute void, without horizon, without time. Commander Vex stared at the bridge display, hoping for any sign, any return to normalcy. But the silence was deafening. "Where are we?" murmured Captain Ral, his trembling voice betraying a fear even he could no longer conceal. The ship's sensors could no longer register coordinates. It was as if the universe itself had erased their presence. Conditions aboard the ship deteriorated rapidly. Gravity fluctuated without warning, and the lights flickered in patterns that seemed to follow an almost organic rhythm. Crew members reported seeing alternate versions of themselves in the corridors, duplicates that silently observed them before disappearing into the shadows. Master Track, growing increasingly paranoid, declared they were trapped in a dimensional snare. "This is manipulation, a technology that distorts reality." But Lyra, now deeply connected to whatever the anomaly was, responded with something even more unsettling. "It's not technology. It's the universe folding in on us." Desperate for answers, Vec confronted Elliot one final time. But this time, he didn't find the calm, composed man in the cell. Elliot was standing in the center of the room, eyes fixed on a point beyond the physical. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said, without even looking at Vec. "What's happening here isn't about you. It never was." Vec, furious, drew his weapon and pointed it at Elliot. "Then explain. What is Nemos? What are you?" Elliot smiled, a smile that seemed to pierce through Vec's very soul. I am the reflection. You are what you never wanted to see. At that moment, the entire ship trembled violently, and the reality around them began to collapse. The walls of the Aegis pulsed as if made of living flesh, and the crew felt an overwhelming pressure in their minds, as though they were being pulled out of their own bodies. Captain Ral screamed, clutching his head, as memories that weren't his flooded his mind. He saw wars he never fought, worlds he never visited, and deaths he never experienced. Vec tried to maintain control, but the sensation of unraveling was irresistible. It was as if their identities were being diluted into something far greater. Amid the chaos, Lyra managed to focus and access the core of the anomaly. She saw what Elliot had been trying to explain all along. Neimos wasn't just a planet, it was a consciousness, an entity that existed outside of time and space, absorbing the memories and essences of the civilizations that approached it. Not out of malice, but because this was the natural cycle of the universe. We're like drops returning to the ocean, she whispered, finally understanding the inevitability of it all. But Vec wasn't ready to accept that. We're not drops, he shouted. We're individuals. But deep down, even he knew he was fighting something immutable. Master Track, in a final act of desperation, tried to activate the Aegis's self-destruct core, believing he could break the cycle with one last sacrifice. But before he could complete the sequence, the ship itself stopped him. The Aegis's systems, now fully integrated with the anomaly, rejected any attempt at destruction. The ship is part of it now, Elliot said calmly, watching as Track was engulfed by a shadow that dissolved him into particles of light. And so are you. Track's resistance was futile, but his desperation served as a final warning for Vec and Lyra. There was no escape. With the crew almost completely integrated into Neimos's consciousness, Vec faced his final decision. Elliot approached him, not as an enemy, but as a mirror. You can still choose, Elliot said. You can merge and find peace, or you can carry the memory of what was. Lyra, now almost fully dissolved into the new consciousness, looked at Vec with a serene glow in her eyes. The struggle is pointless, she whispered. But Vec knew it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about remembering. Someone has to remember, he murmured, as he made his final choice. A choice that would define not just his fate, but the echo of his existence across the universe. The silence that followed Vec's decision was deafening. The Aegis drifted in the absolute void, but the ship was no longer just a metallic structure. Its walls pulsed with a living energy, and the once cold, impersonal corridors now seemed to breathe. The crew had vanished, or rather, they had merged with something greater. Only Vec and Elliot remained physically present, while Lyra's consciousness, along with the others, echoed through the walls, whispering fragments of memories and thoughts. You chose to remember, Elliot said. His voice calm but carrying a weight Vec was only beginning to understand. Now you'll see what that really means. As time passed, if time even existed anymore, Vec began to feel the burden of his choice. Every corridor of the ship carried not just the echoes of his crew, but also of the civilizations that had passed through Neimos before them. Memories of wars, lost loves, discoveries, and destructions merged in his mind. He wasn't just Vec, he was everyone who had been there before. But unlike the complete integration that offered peace, his decision to retain individuality meant carrying the weight of all that pain. Eternity isn't the paradise many imagine, Elliot murmured, watching Vec crumble under the burden of consciousness. Still, Vec refused to give in. He began to explore the ship, searching for a way out, a means to break the cycle. Every room, every console on the Aegis seemed to mock his efforts, presenting distorted visions of futures that would never come to pass. In one corridor, he encountered a version of himself, older, with hollow eyes and a resigned expression. You can't win this, the reflection said. But Vec clenched his fists, determined. Maybe not, but someone has to try. It was that stubbornness, that irrational desire to resist the inevitable, that kept him whole, at least for now. Elliot, who had been a passive observer until now, began to reveal more about his own experience. I made the same choice you did, Vec, he said, sitting in the ship's old command room. I thought I could remember, that I could carry the burden of memory and keep my individuality. But over time, I realized even memory is a prison. Vec looked at him, suspicious. Then why are you still here? Elliot smiled sadly. Because someone has to be. Someone has to greet the next ones who come. Someone has to show the reflection. The words echoed in Vec's mind, planting a seed of doubt. Was he resisting, or just delaying the inevitable? As Vec wrestled with his thoughts, something changed. The void surrounding the Aegis began to pulse with a faint light, almost imperceptible. It wasn't the glow of stars or galaxies, but something deeper, as if the very fabric of space was responding to Vec's presence. Lyra, or what was left of her, whispered in his mind, "You're opening something that shouldn't be opened," but Vec couldn't stop. Every step he took led him deeper into a journey not just through space, but through the very essence of existence. And then he realized, his resistance wasn't just affecting himself. It was affecting Nemos's entire cycle. Elliot, sensing what Vec was about to do, tried to intervene. "You don't understand, Vec. The cycle exists for a reason. Breaking it could have consequences even I can't predict." But Vec was resolute. "Maybe the cycle needs to be broken," he replied. "Maybe there's a way to exist without losing ourselves." With that determination, Vec accessed the Aegis's core, where the ship was most strongly connected to Nemos's consciousness. What he found there was beyond comprehension. A singularity of memory, the convergence point of all the consciousnesses that had passed through that place. And at the center of it all, there was an empty space. A space that seemed made just for him. Standing before that singularity, Vec faced his final choice. He could surrender and fill the void, becoming part of the eternal cycle of consciousness. Or he could attempt the unthinkable, to reject integration entirely and see what would happen. Elliot watched in silence, knowing any attempt to persuade Vec would be futile. With one last glance at his reflection in the ship's display, Vec made his choice. He refused the cycle, and in the moment he did, the universe around them trembled, as if reality itself was trying to decide what to do with this anomaly. What would come next was unknown, even to Nemos. The moment Vec refused the cycle, it was as if reality itself had been torn apart. The Aegis shook with a force that wasn't physical but existential. The ship's walls, once pulsing with Nemos's energy, began to fragment. Not into visible pieces, but into concepts. The space around them twisted, as if the universe were trying to either expel them or absorb them once and for all. Elliot, watching in silence, finally spoke. "You don't understand, Vec. Refusing the cycle isn't just stepping out of it. It's becoming something the cycle can't comprehend." And for the first time, there was fear in Elliot's voice. As the ship drifted between unknown dimensions, Vec felt something shift within him. It wasn't just the memories of civilizations he carried. It was something new, a fragment of existence that belonged to no cycle, an anomaly. The universe around him seemed to struggle to comprehend what he had become, as if Vec were a piece that no longer fit in the grand cosmic puzzle. The voices of the integrated crew, including Lyra's, whispered in his mind. Not with serenity, but with anxiety. "You've put us in danger, Vec," they murmured. Now nothing is certain. Realizing he could no longer remain aboard the Aegis, Vec made a risky decision. He activated the ship's propulsion systems, forcing an exit from the distorted space. But as the Aegis pushed forward, space didn't open. It unraveled. Stars, planets, even the void itself ceased to exist upon contact with the ship. It was as if Vec, by refusing to integrate, had become a kind of existential antimatter, unraveling reality around him. Elliot tried to stop him, but Vec knew he had crossed a point of no return. "I am the flaw the cycle never anticipated," he thought, as the ship moved through nothingness. Outside the Aegis, what remained of the universe was changing. There were no stars, only shadows of possibilities, echoes of what might have been. Vec realized he wasn't just escaping Nemos. He was creating something new, something even the cosmic consciousness couldn't control. Elliot, finally grasping what was happening, made one last attempt to convince Vec. If you continue, you'll create a void that can't be filled. This isn't freedom. It's the end. But Vec, more certain than ever, replied, maybe the universe needs an end so that something new can begin. As the ship crossed this new frontier, Vec began to feel the consequences of his choice. His mind, once full of memories and voices, was now eerily silent. He was no longer part of anything. There was no more connection to Nemos, to the crew, or even to reality itself. He was the last fragment of an existence that had been erased. But, unlike what he expected, he felt no fear. He felt something he had never experienced before: absolute freedom. Without the weight of the past, without the burden of memory, he was a new consciousness, ready to redefine what it meant to exist. And then, something unexpected happened. In the absolute void Vec had created, a new light began to shine. It wasn't a star or a planet, but a spark of pure potential. Vec realized that by destroying the cycle, he had created the opportunity for something entirely new. Not a repetition of the past, but true evolution. Elliot, now just a shadow in Vec's consciousness, murmured, "You created a new beginning," and in that moment, Vec understood the final meaning of his journey. It wasn't about escaping the cycle, but about transcending his own nature. As the new light grew, Vec felt his own existence expand. He was no longer Commander Vec, nor a mere being who had resisted ascension. He was the seed of a new universe, an architect of infinite possibilities. And with that, he realized that true exploration wasn't of the cosmos, but of consciousness itself. The cycle had been broken, but what came next was something even Nemos couldn't predict. The future was open, and for the first time Vec smiled, knowing the unknown was now his home. The absolute void where Vec now found himself was no longer an absence of existence. It was a blank canvas. The new light that had emerged grew slowly, not only illuminating the space around him but also redefining what it meant to be. Vec, now more than just an individual, felt himself part of this nascent universe, but in a way different from the integration Nemos had offered. He hadn't been absorbed into a collective consciousness. He had become the origin of something entirely new. The cycle wasn't just broken, he thought. It was rewritten. As the light expanded, Vec realized it wasn't just brightening the void. It was illuminating possibilities. Future civilizations, life forms beyond his comprehension, began to flicker into existence in fleeting glimpses. But this time, there was no predestined force guiding these beings toward ascension or integration. What he had created was a universe without a script, where every choice truly mattered, where free will was the only constant. And in that moment, Vec understood the true magnitude of his decision. He had freed the cosmos from inevitability. But freedom had its price. Vec felt the profound loneliness of being the only conscious entity in a newborn universe. Elliot, now just a distant memory, occasionally whispered in his mind, but there was no longer a real connection. "You've become what no other could," Elliot's voice said. "But can you bear the weight of creation?" Vec knew the real challenge wasn't fighting against the cycle anymore. It was living with the responsibility of being the architect of a new cosmos. And despite the heaviness of that reality, he accepted it. Because, for the first time, he was certain that the future was uncharted territory. As he watched new stars ignite and the first forms of life emerge, Vec made a silent promise. He would never forget who he was, who his companions were, and what they had faced. Even if no one else ever knew the story of the Aegis and the crew that defied infinity, he would keep the memory alive. Not as a burden, but as a reminder that the unknown can always be challenged. The universe is vast because the mind is infinite, he thought, as his consciousness expanded even further. And so, Vec disappeared into the vastness he had created, not as a solitary entity, but as the first of many to explore a new kind of existence. The echo of his choice would resonate forever, not as a warning, but as an invitation. The universe is waiting to be discovered, and every choice can redefine reality. The future was now a true mystery, and as long as there were those willing to challenge the unknown, the story would never have an end.